my name is Ania Nowicki. I am a holistic health and food coach from vitalityandfood.com. I'm here today with the wonderful Elwin Robinson, who is the founder of Lionheart Herbs, the creator of the Health Mastery Training Program and membership site, as well as the author of the Easy Exhaustion Cure. Hi Elwin, how are you?
Hi Anya, thrilled to be talking to you today.
Always a pleasure. Now, today we are going to talk about something which has come up a lot with your clients, and also I've experienced with my clients. So it's going to be a really interesting topic for us to talk about, because I think it's very, very common for people to suffer from this problem. And we're going to talk about addiction. So now, what's been your experience with your clients in terms of addictions that they suffer from? What is an addiction? Shall we start with that? What is an addiction?
Yes, what is an addiction? To me, an addiction is a compulsion. It's anything where you are drawn to again and again do something which you know doesn't serve your best interests, the best interests of the world, the best interests of the people around you, and yet you do it anyway. So that's quite a broad definition, and in fact from that broad definition you might think, I spend the majority of my day doing that. I don't spend much of my time doing what serves me, what serves the world, and what serves the people around me. And that's where I'd say addiction is really a bigger problem than we often think, because I'd say normally the number one cure of addiction that's used in the world out there is substitution. Okay, so like alcoholics, for instance, they finally manage to quit alcohol. What do they have instead? Usually sugar, or people who stop smoking, what do? They overeat instead, or whatever. There's so many examples of this. So what I wanted to look at today with you on this subject is to really, let's get to the absolute root of it. Let's not just substitute for something else again. Let's actually dig into why we have an addiction in the first place and what we can do to really resolve it.
So apart from the obvious addictions which you've just mentioned, the alcohol and smoking addictions, what other addictions have you come across, just so that people can relate to what you're specifically talking about?
Great point. Yeah, sugar is a really common one, and for all of these that I'm going to mention, there is real biochemical reasons for them as well. Okay, so for sugar, if your blood sugar goes low, then you do tend to crave sugar, and there is a real physiological need as well. However, it is still primarily something else, and that's what we'll go through. Another one is MSG, or any other flavour enhancers. Pretty much all foods these days, people think of MSG. MSG, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, is an excitative neurotoxin. And what it does is it gets into your brain and it stimulates your neuronal receptors to overexcite them. And that basically makes you believe that the food that you're eating, or sometimes the drinks that you're drinking, are more flavourful than they actually are. So rather than just creating food that tastes good, they add a chemical to otherwise flat, tasteless food to make it seem like it tastes good. And unfortunately, this isn't just unhealthy food. This is in all kinds of food that we'd think of as healthy. So basically, they inject it into a lot of meats, for instance. It's in pretty much all pre-packaged, pre-prepared foods. If you buy a shepherd's pie in your local supermarket or in your local pub or in your, anywhere else, it's going to have MSG in it. It's in all sauces, like anything that's got gravy, anything that's got tomato sauce, anything that's got stock in it. Any biscuits, any crisps, any cakes. Now,
what other names does it come up as? Because I know that MSG is quite obvious in crisps, for example, because it's labelled as MSG. But in a lot of other foods, it's not called MSG; it's called other things.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, textured vegetable protein, soya protein, flavourings, natural flavourings. What's the other one? 5-diribonucleotide glutamate, something like that. There is a lot of names. So, and they can, even be something that is good seeming as vegetable protein. You're like, oh, well, that must be good, right? But what MSG is basically is it's glutamate, which is a type of amino acid, which is a type of protein, usually actually found in soya. So soya is the ultimate cause here, attached to sodium, which is a mineral, which is something essential. So glutamate is something that we need to some degree. Relates to glutamine, which is an amino acid that's actually good for us, but it's having far too much, having it concentrated, that overexcites our brain. And when we have it, it can often make us feel like really jittery and really wired, and we have absolutely no idea why. And when you're used to having it, you become kind of numb to it. In fact, you become kind of numb to everything. You become numb to the whole world. It's really pretty terrible. And this is where you want to get off like all processed foods, all packaged foods, really, pretty much all foods that you buy from a restaurant or a cafe or anything like that as well, unless you know who's making it and you really trust them, to really experience life without it. So that's MSG. That's a really common one that I have to deal with a lot. What else is there? There's cannabis. There's cocaine. This is a lot more common than a lot of people think. A cheeky little line here and there. There's prescription drugs of all kinds, right? Now, I'm not a qualified medical doctor, so I can't comment on prescription drugs. But I can mention, for instance, that a lot of the time they contain substances like caffeine, which are known to be addictive, and so that also brings us to coffee, tea, and in fact, I believe that something like I think caffeine is the most commonly used addictive drug that is recognised as such. Something like 98% of the population in the west of the world use either tea or coffee or soda, as it's called in America, like Coca-Cola or whatever, on a regular daily basis just to get through the day. So almost all of us are in the grips of a physiological addiction.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think a lot of people will be able to associate themselves with that. Great, then fantastic. So what's the solution? So you mentioned just before it's about getting to the root cause. What does that mean? Talk us through that.
Great. Well, the tricky thing about addictions is that, like I say, normally we just resolve them with substitution. So what is the ultimate root cause? I'd say the ultimate root cause is a sense of profound dissatisfaction or lack of peace or lack of acceptance of myself right here, right now. Every addiction, whether it is to some substances like we've mentioned, or whether it is to a person, because people are very addicted to each other, the hormones and neurotransmitters that are released by a particular person can also be very addictive. This is scientifically proven. Whether it's a thought, most people are addicted to thoughts in their head. Whether it's a loop of the thought of I am wonderful, or whether it's a loop of the form of I am worthless, or whatever it might be. These are all addictive loops of mind emotion that we play in our head, like a tape or a CD or an MP3 over and over again. We play it to ourselves.
Good enough is another very common one, isn't it?
I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. Yeah, there's so many. But my point is, even I'm wonderful or everything's going to work out, anything that we play to ourselves over and over again habitually is basically a way of escaping from the present moment. Now, I'm not saying that we should spend all our lives living in the present moment, because we're not, animals. Sometimes it is appropriate to use our minds, use our imagination, use our creative capacities, right? But what I'm talking about here is what most human beings are afflicted with, which is this pathological desire to escape the present moment. That's what most of us have. Most of us live in our head most of the time. Live in our head, what does that mean? We're focused on the pictures in our head. We're focused on the words, that we're talking to ourselves basically all day, all the time. Sometimes we're focused on our physical sensations of our body, although that's less common. A lot of people who are into health especially have that a lot. People who have addictions, more physical ones, addictions to food, that's another example. I remember a client a few months ago, and she was overweight, she wanted to lose weight, and she said, I have to eat every couple of hours, something like that, and large amounts of food. And I'm like, well, why don't you just not eat? And she's like, but I feel hungry. And I'm like, well, so what? Just because you feel something in your body doesn't mean you have to go along with it. Just because you have a thought in your head doesn't mean you have to go along with it. Just because you have an emotion doesn't mean you have to go along with it. Now, I'm not saying you should spend most of your life fighting yourself either, but it's just this element of choice, which brings us to what I'm going to get to in a minute. So there are all these kind of addictions, and they're all a way of trying to escape the present moment. So in order to understand this, I think the work of an Eckhart Tolle, or Eckhart Tolle, depending on who you're talking about, which I hope most of our viewers are familiar with to some degree. Certainly very, very popular, one of the most popular spirituality writers of all time, I think. He's done a good couple of books. One is The Power of Now, one is A New Earth, really like A New Earth. So the way that he explains this and the way he models this, I think, is really relevant, which is he talks about something called the pain body. Okay, and the pain body is that part of ourselves that always tries to get us to be anywhere other than the present moment right now.
Sorry.
Is that me farting? That's fine, I can cut, but is he going to carry on doing that? Because we need to not have that during the interview.
Yeah, I know. I don't know is the answer. Hopefully not.
Can you ask him to not do it? Or we can do the interview another time. One or the other, Ania. I'm not like going to be devastated either way.
No, I mean, the only thing is he's come all the way from London to do this, so I don't think I can ask him to do it another time.
Okay, well, then we can do it another time then.
Shall we maybe wait for... Maybe we could give it like 5 minutes and see what happens, and then give it another try, basically, and then give up.
Well, okay, if you can't tell him anything, how about asking?
Okay, well, let me go and ask.
Yeah, because if he's like, I just need to do it for the next 10 minutes, okay, then we'll just stop for 10 minutes and come back to it.
Hold on, Elwin. Right. You are talking about addiction, but what I really want to know, before you go into the detail of how to solve addiction, is how are you qualified to talk about this? What's your experience? Have you ever been addicted to anything?
Yes, that is a good point. I like the way you put that. Yes, I have. Throughout my life, I've been chronically addicted. I'm one of those people who doesn't like do addiction by halves, or at least I was one of those kind of people. So the first few years of my life, I happened to eat very purely because my father was into macrobiotics, which is like, it's not the best diet in the world. I basically just ate bread and peanut butter, to be honest, for the first few years of my life. But at least that doesn't include a lot of bad things, right? It doesn't include sweets. It doesn't include So there's a lot of things I didn't eat until I was about 6. And then I started going to school, and then I started getting into sweets. And I was always like depleted and had low energy, and I think that's less because I was on a macrobiotic diet, and more just because my genetics were pretty bad. Both of my parents were very ill and depleted. My mother's died of cancer, and she had cancer throughout my life. My father had chronic fatigue, and so I don't come from a high energy background, and so when I discovered sugar, there's like an instant hit of energy, and it's just awesome. So I was massively addicted to sweets. I would do absolutely everything I could to get my hands on them, and I would be completely compulsive and binge. And the only reason I didn't end up very fat is probably because, again, it's not a genetic tendency. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have been double my size by the time I was an early teenager.
What's your worst sugar story? Because I was just watching something with Chris Carr the other day, and she said that she actually had to put she would dig things out of her bin, sweets out of her bin that she tried to get rid of. So she'd go through her bin to get her sugar fix, and the only way she could stop herself from doing that is by pouring chemicals over it.
Wow.
You had any like really...
Well, yeah. The worst thing I did is steal to get the money to do it.
Yeah,
that's what I did, and it just used to tear me up. I felt so guilty. I've always had an overly, if anything, developed sense of conscience, sort of feeling responsible for everything, even if it's not my fault. So to actually be stealing, just made me feel absolutely appalling. But it just was in the service of an addiction. So as much as I can understand people who go and rob houses to pay for crack or whatever, because I didn't do that, but it's not a million miles away. It's still stealing, it's still an addiction. That's pretty much probably as low as I went. And eating stuff from, I don't know, maybe this is like a collaborative thing, but with cigarettes, we were sometimes so poor that my friend, he would get his younger sisters to go out onto the roads and pick up cigarette butts and then open up, get the tobacco out, and make joints out of them. And I must admit, I would smoke some of them. So I wasn't picking up roaches or dog ends off the floor, but I was still part of it. Yeah.
God, that's terrible.
It is terrible, yeah, and it is horrible. And whereas most of the other people around me seem to just be, think that that's okay, there was a part of me that was always very like, oh, this is, and feeling deep amounts of despair and disgust about the whole thing. So yeah, I've got pretty low, and after my sugar addiction, I got into coffee about age 11 maybe, and that was like oh my god, I actually feel some energy for a few hours at a time. And then I got into cigarettes, age 14. That was amazing, loved those. And then I got into cannabis, age 15. That was awesome, loved that. Speed at 16, that was awesome, loved that. Never really got on with alcohol because my liver wasn't really strong enough to deal with it. And then it wasn't really till 19 that I had like a big awakening kind of experience, a big kind of, something like being pulled outside of myself and seeing myself for the first time and having a realization about a lot of stuff, which I won't go into here. But went back in, and one of the things that happened immediately after that is that I gave up everything. I gave up smoking, I gave up cannabis, I gave up all foods as well. I was fasting out of nowhere and all kinds of... So all the poisons went out of my life, but that lasted about 3 days. And then everything crept back in over the course. I think not smoking maybe lasted 2 weeks or something. So that it all crept back in probably over the course of 2 weeks. I let it all come back again. And yeah, it wasn't really until... And as bad as things got, it wasn't really until the age of 26 that I finally had enough, and that was just through feeling so ill, so depleted, like rock bottom moments. I remember one for me was, and yeah, just before I get into that, actually, I'll just explain that for me, I didn't have a doing things by half mentality. So if I was going to smoke, I believe denial is the worst indulgence, and I still do, and that will relate to something I'll talk about in a bit. So I would just have as much as I wanted of things. No matter what, so if I smoked cannabis, I would have like 20 joints a day of, really strong skunk, something like that, or 40 cigarettes a day, or whatever it might be. Most things actually didn't agree with me, but coffee, cannabis, tobacco, yeah, that's probably, and sugar.
Yeah.
That's what I had all the time, and MSG, loads of that. So all the time, every day, I'd have like 10 lattes a day with 20 espressos in there. Maybe 10 to 20 joints, depending if I was working or not. 20 to 40 cigarettes, depending if I was working or not. I'd only really eat wheat and dairy, so I'd have like pizza or pasta with cheese or a cheese and tomato sandwich. And and I would take a few supplements, like vitamin or mineral from Holland and Barrett, which is like a mainstream kind of store that we have over here in the UK. And that was pretty much it. So that's
really extreme.
It was really extreme, yeah. And so no wonder that quite early on, by the age of... Oh, and I was also like doing a lot of weight training, trying to get bigger. Doing creatine, which is also really bad for you. Loads of protein. Creatine is like something that makes your muscles a bit bigger by causing inflammation, basically, as I understand it now. And it really damages your kidneys long term. So yeah, I was doing all this, and one rock bottom moment I remember is when I remember looking at my tongue in the morning, and it was just covered. Now it's pretty clean, right? A bit red, which in Chinese medicine would indicate that I'm a little bit hot-hearted still, which is definitely how I'm feeling, in overdrive mode. But yeah, so pretty clean. But when I looked at my tongue in the morning, it was covered in just grey slime.
Wow.
It wasn't even just white, it was grey. It's like the smoke in me had saturated me so much that it was coming out and covering.
Oh God, sounds awful.
It was really awful, yeah. And remember, it's a lot to do with my mouth actually. Also going to a dentist, him telling me that my gum lines were rapidly receding, and that my teeth would not last much longer at this rate, and I noticed my hair was falling out as well. I don't know if you can see, it's still got a little bit of widow's peaky thing here, but it was like properly falling out all at the front, and that's kind of stopped, and if anything, regrown a bit. So yeah, like the wear and tear was starting to show basically, and I didn't like that. So I had one of those epiphany moments again, and I decided I was gonna stop. And of course, really to begin with, I just replaced one addiction with another, which is what I was talking about. I speak from experience. That's usually what happens. So, like, I gave up. First of all, I gave up sugar, and I gave up wheat, and I gave up dairy and soya, and all these foods that are bad for you. And then I gave up smoking cigarettes, and then I gave up cannabis. Cannabis is the hardest. Can't stand the stuff now, can't stand any of this stuff now. But at the time, it was the hardest thing to stop. I felt terrible, absolutely awful, and I replaced that because from a physiological point of view, what all of these stimulants do is that they all raise your blood sugar. So I was used to raising my blood sugar every half hour or less, always having a coffee or a cigarette or something. So then having to go to just eating, every couple of hours, and always having a blood sugar crashing, being hypoglycemic. So yeah, I kind of did this.
I can definitely identify with that. I've not had the same kind of extreme addictions as you in terms of cigarettes and things like that, but I completely identify with sugar and needing to eat. And my biggest addiction that I've had to fight off is binge eating. Really?
Oh, binge eating?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would have thought it would be crack.
Oh, you know me so well. What?
Sorry, yes, binge eating.
You even had to explain to me what was the name for speed? MD something.
Oh, MDMA, yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely naive when it comes to drugs. I've never been really down that route. Never really wanted to. But,
but for all viewers, I'm being flippant because Ania is so clueless about drugs. She's not a druggie, I promise you. Binge eating, right? And but like myself, it seems like you managed to stay slim throughout, right? You didn't get really fat.
No, I put on a lot of weight actually.
Really?
I was borderline overweight. I never managed to. I've got perhaps the opposite personality to you. I've got a non-extreme personality. So although I had addictions, I never really took it to far extremes. So I used to binge eat on relatively healthy food, so it was more portions which were enormous. I would come home and I would cook all from fresh food, but it was all very, very overcooked, and I would eat like a massive wok of food all on my own.
Oh, right.
For over several hours in the evening.
Several hours, wow.
Well, I would just basically eat the entire evening. I wouldn't stop from when I got home from school until I went to bed. And then I went through a whole sugar thing as well, where I couldn't stop eating sweets and biscuits and cakes and things like that. But it's quite a painful experience to go through, whatever the addiction is.
Yeah, because the thing that it's all got in common, I would say, whether it's my extreme one or your more mild, but also, ultimately very debilitating one, right? Is it's based on suffering, and it's based on a lack of control, right?
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing about addiction, is that you feel out of control of yourself. I know that's certainly the thing I found the hardest. Was that similar for you?
Absolutely. I felt I had no control. I felt completely like it owned me, and that I was powerless. And it was definitely to do with filling a void which I had in my life at the time, which was loneliness for me. I felt trapped, completely trapped, and then that obviously led to depression for me as well, which was equally debilitating.
Yeah, because if you feel like you can't trust yourself and like you're not in control of yourself, that is depressing. So what all of these addictions have in common to me, and listening to your story is great, it allows me to see that, we're both exactly the same in this respect that I'm about to say, even though we're very different in how it manifested, is that to me what they all have in common is that you are rooted in two identities, right? One is the identity of being a victim, and one is the identity of being a slave. Okay.
Can you explain? I understand the whole victim side of things, definitely, because I certainly felt like I was a victim, that I'd been hard done by in my life, and that and I actually couldn't. I had a lot of positives. I couldn't appreciate them at all, and I felt that all the bad things, that I was at a complete disadvantage, and that everyone else had it better, and I had it terribly, and that's why I was suffering so much. Can you explain a little bit more what you see being a victim and being a slave as?
Yeah, sure. Being a slave, to me, being a victim is, as you said, it's the ultimate definition of being a victim. And I covered this in a different interview with Phil, but it's basically not being a cause in your life, not being responsible, not feeling like you can choose. But yeah, to me, being a slave means basically that something else is dictating your actions, or someone else is dictating your actions. Okay, so it's a type of being a victim, but it's a very specific type where you feel as if you are not just not in control of yourself, but more you are under the control of something or someone else.
Right. Okay. So it could be sugar, it could be food, it could be like crack. A specific drugs, crack, cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. It's a slave mentality, and it's so basically every time this is only something that goes on in our heads. In my opinion, I don't think that crack or cannabis or coffee or sugar or MSG actually has a consciousness that is trying to control us, but it feels like it. No, but a lot of people act that way.
I just had an image.
And some cures to addictions, they actually encourage you to see it that way. As if as I remember a friend telling me that cigarettes were like this evil monster that was trying to enslave you and destroy you, and you had to not listen to it and stuff like that. And I think that's how a lot of people like model it in their heads, and that's why it feels like slavery, because I am not in control of my own actions, and more than that, I am actively being pulled to do something that I don't want to do because something else is the boss of me, and I have no choice over that. Right, and the reality is that it's addiction, but it feels like it's the actual substance. I don't want to have the coffee; it's just calling me. Everyone else is drinking. It's so nice. It's just you, Elwin. Come and get me. Right. So yeah, that's the slave kind of aspect to it. But what both of them have in common, which brings me back to what I was saying before, is that it's this thing about suffering. Right? It's this thing about not being in the present moment. And that really relates to what you said, Ania, about feeling empty. Okay? So imagine, just for a second, if you were fulfilled. Imagine if you were happy with yourself just as you are. Imagine if you were happy with your life just as it is. Imagine you felt good that your life had a purpose. Imagine that you felt confident that even though you might not know every step along the way, you know where you're going. Imagine seeing that everything that happened before also has a purpose. Imagine feeling good about the life that you have, right? Now, in that place, imagine being the slave of anyone or anything. It doesn't make much sense. You okay there?
I am, sorry, the mobile phone just went off here, so I actually have no idea how to turn the sound off.
Volume control?
It's a Samsung, I'm just not used to. I have no idea how you use these things. But I've got it here to catch it next time.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so.
Imagine.
Yeah, imagine. So, if you're in that position, which I feel in now most of the time, and I hope you do too, Ania, of feeling basically fulfilled and basically good about yourself, then when people say to you, and this is where the addictions come in, because then, okay, so someone offers you a drink, someone offers you a muffin, someone offers you a hit of crack, whatever it might be, then the question is, shall I have it or not, right? And the answer is always, if you feel completely happy with how you are now, the answer is basically going to be no. Not because it's bad, even, but just because you don't want to spoil it. You are happy with your level of consciousness as it is right now. So you don't want to adjust it. You don't want to, have a coffee and overexcite yourself because you feel just excited enough. You don't want to have an alcoholic drink and numb yourself because you feel just calm enough. So if you're happy with the moment as it is, if you're happy with how you are yourself right now, then the desire to change your consciousness in any way is not appealing. Does that make sense so far?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that's really, if we're looking at genuinely dealing with addiction and not just substituting addictions for different addictions, if we're not like just substituting, like we talked about before with me, cigarettes and cannabis to then, with eating, so-called healthy foods every 2 hours or whatever. But if we're looking at genuinely just resolving the whole possibility of temptation of addiction, basically, the bottom line is to get yourself into a high level of fulfillment. Now, I would say that there are two aspects to that. One of them is actually physiological, right? If after years of draining yourself like I had done, and like you probably did to some degree as well, Ania, you can't overnight, no matter how much you shift your mind or your psychology, be completely fulfilled, because literally your body needs to start recreating those neurotransmitters, those hormones, those endorphins that have been depleted, right? So it is partly physiological, and that's where all the steps in health mastery are helping you. Step 1, increasing your energy, lowering your stress. Step 2, detoxifying. Step 3, bringing everything back into balance. Well, that bringing everything back into balance, I talk a lot about the immune system and other things, but what we're also talking about there is hormones and neurotransmitters. And when your neurotransmitters and hormones are in balance, you feel good about yourself and about life. You can't help it, right? Even if your mind is like still on the tape playing loops of "I'm not good enough," you're still going to be "I'm not good enough." You get a smile on your face because to a degree, because your neurotransmitters and your hormones are sorted out. So there's a physiological component to it, and of course, a lot of my teaching is about that. But there is also another component to it, and that's the psychological, mental, emotional, whatever you want to call it. And I feel, often we have to break both patterns. So there's a pattern of being bad in terms of our physiology with ourselves, not exercising enough, not eating well, not breathing right, not drinking enough water, whatever it might be. There's all the physiological stuff. But there's also mental patterns, like we talked about, addictions. And one of the most helpful things I want to introduce here is to, in the same way that if we're used to, taking lots of drugs, then we would do a detox, as it's called, where you stop drugs. If you're used to eating loads of bad food, then we do a fast, right? So just clear out all the bad food, just say no to them. Well, if you feel like addictions are still a temptation, even though you're making a lot of progress with this whole physiology thing, the health thing, then I highly recommend something which I call a negativity fast.
That sounds fantastic. Negativity fast. So tell me a bit more about that.
This is something that I originally got from Tony Robbins, and I did it maybe 4 years ago for the first time. Really before I'd made much progress with my physiology, and I'm absolutely convinced that the combination of this practice plus dealing with the physiology in all the ways that I outline is what helped me get such rapid results compared to other people who spend years and years and still flounder. What it is basically is that, first of all, just to pre-frame this, we need to ask, I want you to ask yourself, Ania, and anyone watching this, ask yourself, have you ever had an addiction that you were really compelled to do, and then you stopped doing it, and you haven't looked back? You haven't been tempted since. So, Ania, can you think of any examples of that for you?
I think for me, the thing that comes to mind is when I gave up meat and became a vegetarian at the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm not sure whether that's the best example because I was never a big meat eater before then.
No. Okay, so maybe this won't relate to you because you haven't had such extreme addictions. But how about the overeating thing now? Is that something that you feel like you've got under control, or is it still off and on?
Actually, I find that it's under control probably 90% of the time, but there is probably maybe 10% of the time when basically I don't use the tools that I have at hand, and when I don't look after myself, sometimes we work ourselves too hard, we don't get enough sleep, there are stresses in our lives, and it's at those moments where I can struggle a little bit, but
okay, that's not a good enough example then. No. Well, I'm asking is for something that's 100%, so it's just absolutely not, never again. It sounds like you may not have done something that bad that you need to have had that. That's all. As
I said, I don't really have. I have a non-extreme personality, so I've never really managed to go to an extreme with anything.
Good. Well, fair enough. So a lot of people.
Let's look at you as an example. You could give a better example than me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I did it with smoking. I did the Alan Carr method, which is basically where you look at just how bad it is, and I maybe twice in the 15 years I'd smoked before that, not 15, 13 years before that I'd smoked. I'd felt about giving up, but like I said, I was pretty much like, I'm going to smoke, and that's exactly what Alan Carr recommends, because he says that if you turn smoking into something that you limit and you just have a little bit, then you're treating it like it's a treat. And that's the worst thing. You should have anything. So I decided, right, in 2 weeks' time is my birthday. And I was like, in 2 weeks' time it's my birthday, and as my birthday present to myself, I'm going to stop smoking. And before then, my plan was to smoke as much as possible. So rather than weaning myself off it, so just to be really absolutely sick of it, And that's exactly what I did. And I smoked and smoked and smoked. And I just smoked absolutely loads until it's just absolutely horrible. And then on my birthday, I was just like, right, stop, that's it, not going to have any more. Didn't do it a sensible way. I mean, we could do interviews another time, maybe about how to quit each particular addiction, because there are ways with all of them that can be helpful. But bottom line is, I just said I stopped. Didn't experience it particularly joyfully, have to admit. I had a lot of anger and frustration and things like that come up. But I stuck with it, And I just had this attitude of, that's disgusting, that's poisonous, I'm not going to do that again, no matter what. And ever since then, I even had 6 left in a packet in the cupboard. I didn't have to throw them away, so I didn't have the temptation. It's like, that's it. I've made the decision. Never again, and it's never again. Doesn't matter. Other people can be smoking around me. It's just, there's absolutely no way I will ever smoke a cigarette again, no matter what. So whether I get a craving, even if I get depressed, even if I get suicidal, even if life really sucks, even if everyone else around me is doing it, doesn't matter. Yeah,
you basically made the decision, didn't you?
Yeah, there's no external circumstance, there's no excuse, basically, that's going to sway me from that. That's the bottom line. So, the reason why I use that as an example for everyone watching this who has had one of those experiences with something, and I encourage everyone to really search and to think, is that true for me about anything? It could also be about a relationship. There may be a relationship with a person that you were kind of addicted to them, even though you knew that they were bad for you, and you kept being drawn back, and they were kind of charismatic, and
that's one I can relate to.
You can relate to that one. And then eventually you're like, you know what, this relationship is bad for me. This person is bad for me. I don't care how much they plead. I don't care how much they beg. I don't care how much I miss them. I'm just saying no. That's it. No matter what. Line. Never again. You are out of my life, Mr. or Mrs. Yeah. So you can relate to that one? Anya?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened to me. I had a very long relationship. It was 6.5 years with a man who, I thought I was going to marry and have kids with. And then I realised that I was just completely unhappy. And when he proposed to me, in fact, I wasn't able. I knew at that point I just wasn't able to say yes, and the reason was because it was wrong. And then I think a couple of weeks later, I just moved out. And that's it. I haven't spoken to him since then.
Right. Okay. So in that case, you knew you were bad for each other, and you just said a definite no, never again. Right? Yeah. And you're not going to be tempted someday to go and see him again if you get lonely or anything like that?
Well, no, definitely not.
Okay.
It's just that is over. There is no. The line has been drawn.
Excellent. So everyone has an example, I knew we'd get there, of an addiction that they have broken like this. A self-destructive pattern of behaviour, which is like an addiction. And that's another example of it. Could be, like I say, it could be a relationship, could be something that you did, it might be gambling, right? That's an activity that people get addicted to. So whatever it is, there's something like that someone's just, no, never again, right? So the point that I'm trying to make with this is that if you manage to do that for that person, that activity, or that substance, you can do that for suffering, full stop. You can do that for victimhood, full stop. And this
That's quite a profound thing to say.
Yes, I realise that, but it's true. When you do it, now that's not to say that it's not ever going to kind of, you're not going to allow it to creep in other forms that you don't recognise yet. But the point is, when you have that extreme, kind of, we've used the ex-boyfriend example that you've got here. Maybe you let him back into your life because he wears a very clever, cunning disguise, like in those Mission Impossible films, like he pretends to be a 50-year-old woman in glasses or whatever, right? So in that case, you might let him back into your life. But again, as soon as you realise, oh, wait a minute, that's that guy in disguise, you're like, no, get out, right? So I'm not saying you never, ever are going to feel that feeling of suffering or victimhood again, but I'm saying you're never going to allow it or tolerate it as soon as you recognise it for what it is. I'd say that, in my experience, that's the best that anyone who I've met can hope for, but that's absolutely amazing, right? And if you're at that level, then that's what I would call mastery of a lot of areas of your life.
Absolutely, because then you're empowered. You're the decision maker. You decide what you allow into your life and what you will tolerate.
Yes, and there's even food equivalents of that, letting things sneak back in. By the way, just to give another example, like just been talking about this today on Facebook. Like you might say, right, I'm not going to eat any more food with chemicals in, no more MSG, forever, done, right? And then you end up eating those kale chips that are, in the country with nutritional yeast on them, right? And then, oh god, these are really nice. Like eating like pot after pot after pot. Kale chips are like this health food. They are healthy. Kale is good for you, but they put nutritional yeast in, and that's like basically very similar to MSG. It's glutamate, so it's the same neurotoxin, hyper-addictive behaviour can come about as a result of it. So again, if you do that by accident because you don't realise that nutritional yeast is another drug, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you've fallen for suffering again. But as soon as you realise, wait a minute, I'm treating this like an addictive drug, well, let me find out about it. Sorry?
I've got another example for you, actually. I gave up dairy about 3 years ago, and that was very difficult initially, not because I didn't want to give it up, because I did. I'd made the decision to completely stop eating dairy, but because it's in so much stuff, and also you don't think what's it called, tzatziki, that's yogurt, that's dairy, or there were just lots of different things that were coming up which had dairy, and I had to really concentrate on what foods contained them and what didn't. But actually, it only took maybe a few months for me to learn that, and that was it. Then no looking back.
That's awesome, and that's what's awesome about making what I call a real decision, or an active will, is that it helps to grow your awareness. And you could say, like, from nature's point of view, nature is fairly ruthless in some ways. Like some people suffer, some people seem to have more, being born with a lot more opportunities than others, and all the rest of it. So you could say that nature's not always fair, but what nature's always trying to do is grow awareness. So every time you try and blinker yourself, every time you try and bury your head in the sand, every time you decide to just try and push everything away and avoid things, you are fighting against the flow of nature, and then you're creating more and more suffering. And every time you grow your awareness, in that simple example that you just said there, Ania, it makes you feel good when you do it, right? Yeah. And you feel empowered, you feel fulfilled, you feel stronger, you feel more self-worth.
And it's exciting as well.
And it's fun.
And it's fun. Okay, so I think probably we need to start wrapping this up.
Yes, so let's talk about the how-to of the negativity fast then.
Yeah.
I'm doing it now. Okay. So, here's what you do. This is really simple. So basically, with a negativity fast, what you do is you allocate, right, for the next 7 days, I'm not going to allow any negative thoughts into my mind. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's it. Now, you need to give yourself a little bit of leeway of that. So what I'd suggest, and you can choose this, but I'd suggest you can say, okay, I'll allow myself up to 30 seconds of focusing on something negative. But if it goes on for longer than 30 seconds, then, and here's the interesting thing, because normally if you decide you're going to do it fast and then you mess it up, you don't follow through on it, what do you normally do?
Yeah, you sabotage, you
give up, right?
Yeah.
Here's the wonderful thing about the negativity fast. If, say, you're 3 days, 20 minutes in, or say even if you're only 20 minutes in, and you realise you've just done this thing about being negative for longer than 30 seconds, you stop and you start the timer again. So the 7 days starts again.
Right, okay.
So if you're 3 days in and you spend 5 minutes moaning and whining and all the rest of it, and complaining and getting angry or whatever, then, oh, damn it, and then you got to start again. And it doesn't matter how many times it happens, every time you've got to start again. And you start again, and you keep doing that until eventually you start again, and you see it all the way through for 7 days, and you're not negative at all. Now, why not just do it forever, you might be asking, why not just aim to do it forever? And that's because, for a few different reasons. One is, if you say I'm going to do something for 7 days, it seems doable. If you say I'm going to change who I am forever, that seems impossible, right?
Yeah.
So we're not saying change who you are forever, we're just saying change what you do for 7 days. You can cope with that, right? So in fact, all we're saying actually is don't make yourself feel bad for 7 days. You can make yourself feel bad afterwards. I know you enjoy making yourself feel bad. It's not like you have to stop forever. Just don't do it for 7 days, that's all. Is that reasonable? Is that a reasonable thing to ask of you? Is that a reasonable thing to ask of you, Ania?
I haven't had many negative thoughts for a while, but yeah, no, I mean, this is the key, really, isn't it? It's breaking it down into something which is absolutely achievable, and 7 days is doable. And I really like the fact of just allowing yourself 30 seconds grace, and then to pick it up again. And okay, so if you end up having a negative 5 minutes or half hour, then still another 7 days is not a lot to add on to 3 days. Or even if it's, you're on day 6, well, it would just be really easy if you've managed to get all the way until to day 6 to do another 7 days. And then once, the sense of achievement after 7 days is massive.
It's amazing. And it goes along, you see, the mind is lazy. The mind likes to just focus on everything. It has its certain habitual patterns of feeling bad, but it also just moves around everywhere all the time, and so the mind doesn't like to focus. So if you tell it you need to focus on anything for 7 days, even if you tell it to focus on why life is terrible and you're no good for 7 days, it won't want that either, because it just doesn't like to focus. The mind doesn't like to focus. You have to train your mind to focus. It's like a muscle that you develop through exercising, So if you say to your mind to just do this, it will just sabotage you, and then you'll feel like giving up. But the thing is, if you make yourself start again every time, the mind eventually relents. It's like, God, he or she's serious. Okay, I'll give in. I'll just do it. Right?
Or, I mean, another way of looking at it is that the mind needs clarity, and it needs clarity to have focus. So if you give yourself a strict rule, which is, no negativity for longer than 30 seconds for the next 7 days, or else you start again, then you have absolute clarity of what you're going to do, what's going to happen.
Yes, definitely.
Then you can flex that muscle until it actually starts working in the way that you want it to work.
Yes. The other good thing about the 7 days is, of course, we wouldn't be able to keep making ourselves feel bad and disempowered on a regular basis if we didn't manage to justify to ourselves that there is some benefit to it. So, but I have to think negatively. The world's not just a shiny, happy place. When there's bad people out there, there's bad things out there. Some things just go wrong. Some things so we can say, okay, all of that's valid. Maybe it is sometimes worth focusing on the negative. And I actually believe that, for about anything from 1 to 5% of the time, it's useful to focus on what's negative, because that's your areas of improvement. That's your areas that from which you grow and all the rest of it. So that's fine. But we're just not saying, okay, you can never be negative. We're not saying being negative is bad. We're just saying that you're addicted to it, you do it way too much, and just stop for 7 days, just to prove to yourself that you can. And then by all means, if you want to go into making yourself feel bad again so that you can improve in some area, go for it. But just for 7 days, in a row, non-stop, don't do it. Really powerful. Now, there's a trick to this as well, and I won't reveal the trick in this video. We might do it in a different later video where I actually tell you. But there's something even beyond this, which if you actually do it, you'll experience the results. So if you're watching this right now, I highly recommend that you do it. It's a lot. The implications and the effects are a lot more profound than you might suspect just from hearing what we're saying and mentioning the limited benefits that we're able to mention here. And I would just point out another place of negativity as well. Look at every time you hear the phrase, I can't. So if you're making a choice, fair enough, but I can't do this, I can't do that, this is impossible, I shouldn't, absolutely, or I should actually. I should or I shouldn't, either way. I do a lot about should and a different thing, but yeah, definitely should or shouldn't, can't, any form of insulting yourself. If there's anything you ever say to yourself that you wouldn't say to someone else who you're scared of, then don't say it. If you wouldn't say it to, I don't know, your strict mother or father, then don't say it to yourself either. Don't talk to yourself in a way that it gives yourself respect, acknowledges your own value, and maybe even shows yourself some love. Right, but you don't always have to be positive, right? Neutral is okay too. It's just not negative. That's all. And then the attitude is really simple. I mean, everyone's probably going to have their own metaphor for this, and hopefully you'll come up with a feminine metaphor, Ania, from your perspective. But I quite like, it's almost like a computer game where you've got these bad guys coming at you from every angle, and in order to progress and win the game, which is this 7 days, you have to, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. That's what all these negative thoughts are. You just have to take them out. As soon as one comes up, you have to stay really vigilant and aware, then bash, knock it out of the way, Just
karate chop.
Yeah, just no. And I don't think you're really good enough. No. Oh, and it would be really nice to have that creep cake. No. Every negative thing, just no.
Or stop.
No.
Yeah.
Stop. Yeah. Stop. No. And then force your focus onto something more positive. Whatever that may be, something that you're grateful for, something that you're happy about, something or someone that you love, whatever it might be. So just no, and then something positive. Really simple, breathtakingly simple. It's a life skill that will guarantee that you are never in a bad position again. It's a life skill which ultimately, if you stick with it, will mean the end of suffering.
Another method which I've come across is when you have that thought is to actually flip it to the exact reverse. So if you have a negative thought like I'm not good enough, you flip it to I am good enough, or you're not clever enough to do that. I am clever enough to do that. And even if you don't believe it, just by flipping it over and saying it or even writing it down. That starts working on your mind and starts changing the way you think.
That's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah, perfect. Just come up with the exact opposite of whatever the negative thought is, and then I would suggest to embellish on that, ask questions. So let's say if it's I'm stupid, you're like no, I'm clever, and then ask yourself what reference experiences do I have for me being clever? What examples can I think of? Is there anyone who has described me as that? Have I ever done anything that a clever person might do? Look for what's the word? Evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everyone is good at something, and everyone has a purpose in this world, and therefore you will always find an example, some evidence for why you are worth it, why you are good enough.
Yes.
Why you are loved, why you are wonderful. Right?
Absolutely. Oh, Ania.
That was the feminine side of me.
Yeah, it was really good.
Fantastic. Are there any dangers to doing this negativity fast?
It can feel that way sometimes. It can feel like, oh God. One of them is that everything that you've been... The one thing is that the universe will test you, right? Or your mind will test you, depending on how you look at it. So everything will come up to try and sway you. And again, you just see that as like a challenge, In the same way, if you decide, right, I'm not going to drink any alcohol anymore, then suddenly your friend comes around and offers you a free, 20-pack or a bottle of the finest wine or whatever, and just to tempt you, right? Just to make it more difficult. So you can kind of almost expect that, and don't see that as anything other than part of the game or part of the experiment. You know, it's just another opportunity to say no. So that's a potential danger. And the other danger, which we feel most of the time, is that if I don't focus on the negative, everything's going to go to shit. You know, I have to worry. I have to be anxious. I have to be tense. Because if I don't, then everything's going to... This is the control freak thing, and it's so common. I have to feel bad. I have to worry. I have to be anxious. I have to focus on what potentially could go wrong, or it will. Right? That one's actually false. Bad things happen all the time. So there's no doubt about that one. Bad things happen more often to people who focus on bad things.
It's true.
That's a fact.
One of the other dangers which I have just thought of is the fact that for some people it's such an integral part of their personality to be negative. They could find themselves in a place that they're really where they're really unsure of themselves when they switch. And if anyone who's watching this knows that might apply to them, and that's what's stopping them from doing this, I think just embrace it. You know, just have a go, see how you feel, talk to people about it, you know, contact us, and see, you know, just experiment with it, see what it feels like to be a positive person instead of someone who's so dependent on being negative and so profoundly negative. Absolutely, that's a great point, and it actually leads to the secret stuff we're going to cover next time, so don't tell them anymore. Yeah. No, it's a good point, and that is one of the challenges that can come up. You're absolutely right, is that you don't know who you are anymore. That's a potential danger. If I'm not this person, if I'm not a victim, you know, if I'm not a slave, then who am I? But like Ania says, you know, ask, by all means, ask for help with that, and by all means, you know, just embrace a new identity. Ideally, create a new identity, which I'll talk about in a different program. But basically, I would just emphasise focusing on doing the practice and worrying about it later. Right, worry about what it means about you at the end of the 7 days. Absolutely. Just give it a go. Try it. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation with you. I think that it's will be massively beneficial to everyone who watches this. So thank you very much, Elwin. Again, your website, I think this will be on your website, so I don't need to give you a website. Yeah, well, I'll give you my other websites if you want, but yeah. So you've got lionheartherbs.com and a number of others. ElwinRobinson.com, EasyExhaustionCure.com, DoubleMyEnergy.com, and TheCompleteDetoxProgram.com. So this is Elwin Robinson and Ania Nowicki from vitalityandfood.com. It's been an absolute pleasure being here with you today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.